Well, everyone, it's time for us to go and take a look at the M4 MacBook Air and compare it against the M1 MacBook Air and see which particular MacBook is the better one for you. Now, for me personally, the biggest thing I would definitely tell you is that if you have all the money in the world, then definitely going through and buying something like an M4 MacBook Air would make a lot more sense to go and buy than something like an M1 MacBook Air. That's not to say the M1 MacBook Air is a bad MacBook or anything, but it definitely does make a lot more sense to go through and buy something like, a MacBook Air, the newest one, rather than buying like a last generation MacBook when it comes down to it. So hopefully that kind of makes some sense for you. If you at any point want to go through and buy any one of these MacBooks though, links will be down in the description below. You can get them from there and you can help support the channel at the exact same time. Now, starting off with the outside of both these particular MacBooks. The MacBook Air, the M1 model, first came out in 2020, and since then, this type of MacBook has taken the world by storm. A lot of people really enjoy this type of MacBook. They've had a really good time with it, and I definitely would agree with that. This is one of those types of MacBooks that you can buy and still have a really good time with even so many years later, which I genuinely think is one of the most important things to keep in mind here when you're going through and buying a device. Now, when you take a look at this MacBook, you're getting a really good build quality. These types of Macs, the reason why they have held up so well was because of the chipset, which we'll get into in a second. But definitely if you're going to go through and buy this type of MacBook, the design, it came out in one size. It was a 13-inch size model. Since then, the M4 models do have more sizes you can choose from. But I do think this is a really cool thing that was going on for this type of MacBook. But because it's a little bit older, you can probably buy it for hundreds and hundreds of dollars cheaper than what it originally came out for. With the M4 MacBook Air, this type of MacBook came out in two different models. So it came out in a 13-inch model, and it also came out in a 15-inch model as well. So that right there in and of itself is a very big thing to keep in mind, because if you're wanting to go through and pick up a device, you're probably going to want to go through and pick up a phone that might be giving you a little bit of better capability here and there. And that is kind of what's going on here for the most part, is that with a device like an M4 MacBook Air, that one's going to be giving you really good experience, but it is going to be coming out in two different sizes, which I actually liked a lot. They're giving you similar types of port structure, but the thing to keep in mind here is that when you look at both, they're both tailored a little bit differently. The M1 MacBook Air starts at a thicker point and it gets to a thinner point. The M4 MacBook Air stays at its thickest point all throughout. So it is a very thin point, between both of them, which is something that's really cool. So that is kind of what's going on within these types of devices too in that particular situation. Now, on top of that, another very big thing to keep in mind here too is that if you're looking at both these phones, the M4 MacBook Air phones, these MacBooks, the M4 MacBook Air has kind of an advantage. It does actually go through and give you that MagSafe capability. So that is kind of a nice thing going on for that type of MacBook, that it does give you the ability of going through and, having that MagSafe capability if you really want to. It has the same type of USB Type-C ports, two Thunderbolt 4 ports, but definitely with the MacBook Air, having that ability of having a MagSafe port does kind of free up a port if you're wanting to charge it. That way you can go through and you can plug it into some other devices and do some other things there. And I do think that is kind of an advantage for that type of MacBook when it comes down to it in that particular situation as well. So when you kind of take a look at both of these MacBooks on the outside, I definitely do like both of them. I think they both have held up very well. If you are going to go ahead and pick up a MacBook, as I've always stated, it does make a lot of sense to go and buy the MacBook that you can afford. If the M4 MacBook Air is is in your budget, that one is so much better. But the M1 MacBook Air is still very good when it comes down to it from that standpoint as well. So from the exterior, that kind of covers it up there. But one thing I really want to hit on that really bothered me with my MacBook Air or my M1 model MacBooks was that if you wanted to go ahead and connect it to multiple different displays, this was always a little bit of an issue that you were running into. So with the MacBooks, right, if you're going to go through and plug it up to different type of displays, the M1 MacBook Air, you could only go through and plug it into one additional monitor. So it can be a Thunderbolt monitor, it can be any monitor like that, but you can only go through and dock it up to one display basically. With the M4 MacBook Air, you do have the capability of kind of docking it up to another display if you want to. So you do have a little bit more capability when it comes down to multiple monitor support. So that right there is going to be kind of a big advantage for you probably. And for me personally, if I'm going to go through and pick up a MacBook, like I said before, I definitely want to be able to buy a MacBook that's going to be giving me multiple display support. So the M1 MacBook Air might not be able to give me that. So That right there is another very big thing to keep in mind there as well. When you actually take a look at the displays themselves though, and you open these things up, like I said, you're getting two different models of the M4 MacBook Air where you were only ever getting one model of the M1 MacBook Air. The M1 MacBook Air is giving you a 13.3 inch model. The M4 MacBook Air is giving you this 13.6 inch model for the cheapest one, but you can also spec it out to a higher end, bigger screen model as well. So that is in and of itself another really important thing to keep in mind there from that particular situation. Now, personally for me, I think the M4 MacBook Air's panel does look better. It looks sharper. It is the better looking one for the most part. If you're going to go through and pick up a device, that one is definitely going to be the one that is the better one here. But the M1 MacBook Air screen still looks very good. It's a Retina display. It gives you True Tone. And coming from the older styling of like a 2015 MacBook Air, this one for sure still looks very, very good for the most part as well. I genuinely do not have that much to complain about there from that type of device when it comes down to it. So I do think from that standpoint, that is kind of one really big thing to kind of keep in mind there from that particular situation as well. When you look at the trackpads and the keyboards, basically the same type of layout. They both have Touch IDs. They both have the same type of experience when it comes down to that standpoint. So there really isn't that big of a difference when it comes down to that situation too. They're both relatively kind of the same thing when it comes down to it for the most part as well. On top of that, when you look at the power behind both these MacBooks, the M4 MacBook Air is a very, very powerful MacBook. That one's going to be giving you a 10-core CPU built in, up to a 10-core GPU, up to 32 gigabytes of RAM, and up to 2 terabytes of storage. With the M1 MacBook Air, this one gives you 8-core CPU, so a little bit less, 7-core GPU, there's only one model of it, you cannot spec it up or down. You can get up to 16 gigs of RAM and up to 2 terabytes of storage. So if you weren't keeping track, which is okay, the M4 MacBook Air gives you 3 cores extra GPU if you tab it out. So if you max it out, you have to pay more money for the 10-core GPU model. But if you're okay with that, you can spec that out to being a more performance-heavy MacBook from that standpoint. And you can go and spec it out to be giving you twice the amount of RAM. The M4 MacBook Air can give you 32 gigabytes of RAM, which means that type of MacBook is going to be giving you a very good type of experience when it comes down to there from that particular situation as well. And like I said before, I do think in and of itself is another very important thing to kind of keep in mind there from that particular situation, because you're going to be able to go through and pick up a MacBook that's going to be giving you a very good amount of power and just very good capability when it comes down to it from that particular side too. Also with the battery life, the MacBook Air, both of them are giving you 18 hours of video playback. It's kind of funny. You probably expect it to be, a little bit different on the newer one, but I guess they weren't able to do that. So when it comes down to it, in my personal opinion, I definitely do think both of these MacBooks are very good. But if you have the money, go for the 4 MacBook Airs. These ones are giving you better power, better capability, and they're just going to be able to be giving you just a better option of a MacBook when it comes down to it. With the M1 MacBook Airs, I think these things are still very good, and if you can buy them for hundreds of dollars cheaper than an M4 MacBook Air, these things still have a lot of power within them. They're still giving you Apple Intelligence, if that even matters, and you're still going to be able to go through and buy a MacBook like this that's going to be giving you a lot of power. And I do think that is a really cool thing going on for this type of Mac when it comes down to it. So the choice is yours, but if I'm going to go through and recommend a MacBook to some people, it's probably going to end up being something like an M4 MacBook Air. If you don't want to buy that, buy the M3 or M2 MacBook Air. If you don't want to buy those, then you can buy the M1 MacBook Air. You can do what you want, but that's kind of what I'd recommend doing. So in terms of that kind of covers it up there. If you have any other thoughts or questions, please let me know in the comment section below. Hit the like button, that would mean so much, but definitely hit that subscribe button. But more importantly than everything else, I love every single one of you guys. Hopefully I'll catch you guys in the next video. Peace out till then.